The Unwanted, Chapter 17, Part 2. The next day, I stayed in bed late with the sheet over my head. When it was time for breakfast, my mother came in to look for me. She found me shaking silently under the bedspread. Worried, she pulled the covers off to examine me. I stared past her face into space beyond the ceiling. Grasping me in one of her hands, she slapped me with the other and screamed, "Kian, get up!" When I remained unresponsive, her panic increased. "What is going on? Talk to me. What is happening to you? Oh, God, where is the blood coming from?" Her hysteria pulled me back into the room where everybody was staring at me with curiosity. Sprawled across his bed, Lum watched me. His dark look jerked me out of my stupor. I'm fine, Mommy," I stammered. "I am just a little tired." "Where does this blood come from? Where are you bleeding, Kian?" she asked, touching the dried stain on my bedspread. "He's fine," Lum interrupted. "Just leave him alone." His eyes never left my face as he spoke to her. Early this morning, his nose bled a little bit. I helped him take care of it already. Right, Kian? I nodded. My mother, however, was not convinced. She frowned with skepticism. "Nosebleed?" she asked. "Impossible. He never had a nosebleed before. Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," he assured her. "Leave the boy alone to rest. If his condition doesn't get better, we'll take him to the hospital, okay?" His words seemed to calm my mother, and she laid me back down on my pillows. He took her by the shoulder and led her outside. Soon after, Lum returned, pulling the sheet off me. "Get up and get out of bed," he said. "You have to convince your mother that you are not sick. Otherwise, she'll find out what a little tramp you were last night, and then I won't be about to cover for you any more." He pushed me out of my bedroom and into the front lawn. For several minutes, I sat on the front steps, holding on to my belly. The pain inside me was excruciating. I could also feel the blood oozing into my underwear, and its odor nauseated me. From the other side of the wall, Zui waved, beckoning me to come over. Gathering myself, I played with him and Goofy for the rest of the day and did not return home until dinner. That night, my mother came to tuck me in. Her soft hand rested on my forehead, checking my temperature. In his bed, Lum watched us through his half-shut eyes. His presence made me anxious. "How are you feeling, Kian?" she asked me. "Fine," I answered her. "Are you sure? You don't look fine to me." There was a moment of silence before she went on in a voice filled with worry. "Tell me what's wrong. It's been several weeks. You can't possibly still be upset about Lulu." Instead of answering her, I closed my eyes, pretending to fall asleep. "Listen," she said. "This is very hard for me to do, but I promise to get you another dog tomorrow if you promise to get well." I opened my eyes. Under the dim light, my mother's face sagged with new creases. There were tears in her eyes. I shook my head at her suggestion. "You don't want another dog?" she asked. "No." "Tell me what you want then. The butcher's dog just had a litter. I already told him to reserve a puppy for you. What am I going to do with the puppy if you don't want it?" "Give it to Jimmy," I suggested to her, and then added, "Mommy, I don't want another dog." "Okay, if you are sure. But please be well. I need you." My mother kissed me goodnight and turned off the lantern on her way out. Once she left the room, I became paralyzed with fear. In the dark, I anticipated Lum's approach with every fiber in my body. At last his snoring soared into the silent room, and then I heard him mumble something unintelligible in his dream. I crawled out of bed, holding a pillow in my hands. Quietly, I tiptoed out of the room and into the garden. Outside, dark clouds hung low above the trees, warning of the coming rain. Trees transformed into monsters, chanting an eerie rhapsody. Again, to my active imagination, everything in the garden materialized into weird forms around me. Even so, it was a much less threatening place than my bedroom. I lay down on my back near the house. About 10 feet above me, a corrugated scaffold concealed most of my view of the sky. A short distance away, Lulu's grave lay hidden in the ground. Her presence somewhat softened my anxiety, and I began to relax. Sleep came quickly, but not for long. From the depth of my subconscious, I recalled Lum's threats. "Hey, Kian," his voice echoed. "I will go after your brother next. I will go after your brother next. I will go after." I jolted from the cold ground and ran back inside. Drawing a deep breath, I sneaked past Lum's bed in my bare feet. Deep in his own dream, my brother was not aware of my presence until I was next to him. I shook him awake, keeping him from making any noises with the palm of my hand. Jimmy opened his big eyes to stare at me. "Get up and come with me," I whispered in his ear. "Kian?" His eyes blinked, but he did not yell. Matching my whisper, he asked me, "Where are we going?" "Don't ask any questions. Just take your pillow and follow me." I helped him out of bed and guided him outside to the front porch. Jimmy did not ask any more questions, only looked at me with his trusting eyes. I told him to lie down on the pavement, and I lay next to him, holding him in my arms to shield him from the cold air as much as I could. We fell asleep holding on to each other as the rain began to fall. The scaffold kept the raindrops from reaching us through most of the night. The next morning, my mother was furious to discover that we were not in our beds. She yelled into our faces, jolting us from our sleep. "Wake up! Why are you sleeping in the rain?" We jumped up, not knowing what to say. "Ugh, kids," she moaned. "Why are you such a problem for me? Tell me what I have done to deserve this. And you," she turned to me, "don't you remember anything I told you last night?" Behind her were my grandparents, holding on to the door and looking at us with worry. On the floor, Jimmy sneezed. His face was covered in sweat and reddened with fever. "Look what you've done," my mother cried. "Your brother is getting sick." She picked him up in her arms and snarled at me, "Get inside. I'm going to kill both of you." She put Jimmy in bed and shifted her attention to me. "Was it your idea taking your brother outside last night?" she asked. Fearfully, I nodded. "I knew it," she shrieked. "Are you crazy, or are you rebelling against me?" She grabbed my shoulders. Her fingernails found their familiar way into my flesh. "I am sorry," I cried out in pain. "I got scared last night." "Why? What are you afraid of?" "I don't know, Mommy." "Stop. He is just a child, for God's sakes," my grandfather broke in. "Haven't your children gone through enough already? Give them some time to adjust to the new situation, please. The child must have a reason why he got so scared. Why don't you find out from him instead of beating him up like he was your enemy?" "He is spoiled, Daddy," she barked. "He is making the other one sick, and I can't even imagine what other stunts he is going to pull next. What am I supposed to do?" "Stop yelling," my grandfather said. "Something must be terribly wrong for my grandchildren to leave their warm beds in the middle of the night and sleep on the cold dirt outside. Let me ask him." Turning to me, he lowered his voice to an almost inaudible. "Kian, tell Grandpa why you did not stay in your bed last night. Why did you sleep outside like the homeless people? What are you running away from?" I did not answer him. Strength ebbed from my body, leaving my face hot with dizziness. I leaned against the wall for support. My grandfather sighed with frustration. Turning to my mother, he spoke with unusual vigor. "This is a new plan," he said. "From now on, Kian is going to sleep with me, and Jimmy is staying with Grandma for a while. Would this make you feel better, my boy?" I nodded. Satisfied, my grandfather retreated back into his bedroom. From his bed, Lum sucked his teeth noisily and stepped outside. My mother muttered with annoyance, "I hope you are not spoiling them, father." She then also went out, pounding her feet on the ground with frustration. At the front door, the butcher appeared with a small puppy, resting peacefully in the palms of his hands. No one paid any attention to him, except for my brother. He got up from his bed, reaching out to receive the dog from the butcher's hands with a small cry of happiness. My grandfather kept his promise. Night after night, he rocked me to sleep in his arms, trying his best to keep my nightmares away. At the same time, in the next room, Jimmy shared his bed with my grandmother. My mother went into labor in September, 2 weeks early. In a dirty room of the hospital, next to the venereal disease section, she gave birth to my sister. The moment that she was pushed into the world, she began crying nonstop, as if she were constantly in pain. My mother called her Betty, meaning little girl, a name that reflected my mother's indifference to her. A few days later, Lum came in for a visit. Betty was feeding at my mother's breast. Without touching either of them, he leaned over to stare at his daughter. My mother avoided looking at him. In her tired voice, she asked, "What's on your mind, Lum?" He whispered to her, "I don't want to be here anymore. I am getting myself out of this mess." Then, without waiting for her answer, he continued, "Let's face it, we are making each other sick by staying together. To make it easy for you, I came up with a plan to help you get rid of me." "What can you possibly be thinking?" she asked. "I have a connection." The tip of his nose almost touched my mother's face, and he said, "I need some money. Help me escape."